It was a man called Jack Straw from Essex who came over, you can't make it up, couldn't I, who urged that they should have elections in Kent to get their leader. Tyler came through, and it said he'd fought in the wars in France because people were so impressed by the way he was bringing together this mass of people. Some said 100,000, some said 60,000, and moving them in this direction and that direction, finding objectives, because the English army would not come out to fight. So he had to find enemies, as it were, whether it was a castle or getting into London, which he managed to do, which nobody managed, getting into the White Tower, which nobody managed to do. He'd engineer all that. And I thought, well, he must have been a soldier. And so why don't I make him a soldier under the Black Prince? And what soldiers would do in a battle, it seems to me, in those days, having a battle the next day, bright people, like he was an artisan, a tiler, he was literate, we know that, and they would sit and say, well, what would you do? I would do that. No, I think we should do that. Now, they would talk tactics. That's what they would do, it seems to me. It's a fair assumption. So he got to know about tactics and so on. So I have a bit of that battle there. And he comes forward. What do I add? Well, I add all that. I add that he went to one of the great battles in English medieval history, led by the Black Prince. I give him, well, we know he had a daughter, and we know he had a wife, but I give him three sons who'd been killed by the plague. Of course, the dialogue throughout is invented, but it's invented on lines of, I try to keep it, as it were, I can't do the language of the time, because who could? There are so many different dialects, and some people in London are speaking this sort of French or that sort of French, or bits of Gob Latin here, or Italian, or maybe somebody could, taking about 25 years, I'm not being sarcastic, maybe somebody could, maybe be marvellous, but I couldn't. So I did it in a sort of decent English, which I tried to make as pre-conquest as possible in some ways. And so he led them into London. And in London you have to track why he did what he did. Why did he decide to cross Southwark Bridge? How did he get across Southwark Bridge? Well, we call it Southwark Bridge, London Bridge, which nobody got across London Bridge. It was massively fortified. Nobody got in the White Tower. Next to Constantinople, it was the most fortified tower in, let's call it, Europe. But he got in with his men. And he said to his troops in the speech I gave him, I will make the king meet us. And the king did meet them. Nobody believed him. Nobody called the king to a meeting, but he met them 3 times. And now to the king. We have this boy, 14-year-old. And just one thing I'd like to say here, because I'd like to take questions if anybody's interested. One of the most spectacular events in this extraordinary history, because it did look as if they'd won. The second meeting at Mile End, the king promised them everything. King and his councillors, everything. All that they'd asked for, all those things I was saying about wood, everything. And not only that, he gave his great seal to things which were being done. That day and night the chancery operated. They got scrolls with a seal on. He gave them his pennant. And so they started to drift away. They'd won. They'd got everything. This meeting at Mile End, just east end of London. But that wasn't enough for John Ball. And it wasn't enough for Tyler by then. They wanted another meeting the next day at Smithfield, which they had. And there's still a lot of them. And there's the king with his court, about 200. They're supposed to come unarmed, 200. And Joan, his mother, did not come. She'd been there, not at the first, but she'd been there at the second one, the big one, encouraged her. And he expected her to be there. I don't think it was because he was soft or anything. She was a counsellor. She was a very important, perhaps the most important counsellor, but she did not come. Now, why? And then he did something extraordinary, one of the most extraordinary single acts in English history. Why did he do that? Nobody in any of the chronicles tells me why. So this is what I made up. His brother, half-brother, one of these rascals, came and with a little box from his mother onto Smithfield and said, "Our mother has sent you this." And he opened the box, and there's a very plain ring in it, very plain. Now, Richard, by that time, at the age of 14, was having jewellery made for him, especially in Czechoslovakia. I mean, he was gorgeous and wonderful. But this is a very plain ring. And the brother said to him, "Your mother says this is what your father wore when he won his first battle. Now Richard knew, because who didn't, that the Black Prince had won his first battle when he was 16 years old. They'd gone to France, met a numerically superior army. The French always had a superior army. This is just a fact. They're a bigger country, more people. And he'd asked if he could lead into the battle with his force, his battalion. And the king, his father, had agreed. So he led, spearheaded it. And one or two of the people, 2 or 3 years, came back to Edward. This is all recorded. Came back to his father and said, he's surrounded. Words to this effect. He's in terrible trouble. You must go and help him. And his father held back the English army and said, no. Today he must win his spurs. And he went through and he won. And Richard knew that. And he'd always idolized his father, but he knew that that is the great thing that his father had done. So Wat Tyler came to negotiate with him. Wat Tyler was assassinated in a cowardly way, tried to get half dead. He tried to get back over the field, fell off a horse, and everybody. It was a disaster. He shouldn't have gone on his own, and never mind. And there was this moment. Must have been like, the still point of the turning world for a second there in Smithfield. What was going to happen? The great leader was dead. There were only 200 people in the court there. All the flower of ruling England were there. Thousands of men there, with bows and arrows which could reach across Smithfield. With one flight, they could have absolutely eliminated, let us call them the ruling class of England, and got everything they wanted. And at that moment, with that message, this boy took off on his own for them on this great horse. This is recorded, went flashed right across Smithfield. And as he approached, they saw it was the king. And they knelt. They knelt down. And he took his horse right up to them, nearer than I am to you, reared it up and said, I am your chief now. I will lead you. I will see you safe. Those are recorded too. And they drifted away. And in that sense, it was over. Except that 2 weeks later, he broke every promise he'd made. And a letter went out saying, peasants you are, peasants you were, and peasants you will remain, but in a condition far worse than that you have ever known. And his armies came back, and they went into the villages and towns, and there was hangings and drawings and quarterings and such and such and such. John Ball was eventually caught and tried, and I made that trial. Well, I didn't make the trial up. He was tried in public, and he wouldn't kneel to the king. But the things that were said there, and the things that the king's lawyer was doing, you had to invent, and you invent along the lines of what you think would have happened, because there was a trial, and there was a great lawyer did it. So what did he say? Well, it isn't recorded, so you can work out what he might have said. And if you think, well, that's about somewhere near the mark, and so on. He was, well, if you really want to know, he was hanged, drawn, and quartered. I won't tell you the detail. Well, you probably know it yourselves anyway. It's a bit of it's a terrible way to die. So that was that. Now, in one way, that was 2 things happened to that in the history of history, as it were. One thing that the English historians quickly covered it up. They didn't want to know. There's very little literature about it. They didn't take it on and take it up because it was so dangerous. By writing about it, they would be encouraging others. They wiped it out. The second thing was, some people said, well, look, it failed. That shows you. No consequences. What was the point? Well, the point was that it established an undercurrent. History is to do with currents and undercurrents. It established the undercurrent, a powerful undercurrent of radicalism in this country, which for some of us has not been powerful enough along the way, but it has been steadily powerful. And then it was transmitted to America and to Australia and so on, and the idea that power should come further and further and further down the scale. And that's what it's all been about for several hundred years. Pulling power back to people in many different ways. Not only to men and then to women and so on and so forth. And then and to people of different race and colour and so on and so forth. That's what's been going on. And it's been a fight all the way. But that was inspired, I think, by this massive insurrection, which was soon repeated with Kett's rebellion soon after. You can say it's taken up in certain aspects in the Civil War, certainly by the Chartists and by the suffragists in the 19th century. There it goes on, and by the socialists at the beginning of the 20th century. So that's, I think, the inheritance of it. I think I've said enough. Thank you very much.